Hey there, I'm Steve, and welcome to Jamsinentertainment, and welcome to the conversation. Just before we get started, there are many ways you can help out. One is to like and subscribe so you never miss the conversation, but most importantly, please share this video or audio, however you're consuming this. Let's get the word out there. There's a community where we can have conversations like this. Today, I am joined by Mike and Chris. They're both back on the podcast. How's it going, guys?
It's going. I had a tough day at work today, but other than that, I'm here. I'm alive.
Yeah, same here. It's alive, ready to go, ready to rock and roll.
All right, today we're going to be talking about a card game we all love, Magic the Gathering. Mike, you haven't been on in a while. We'll start with you. How did you get your start in Magic the Gathering?
So I started playing card games when I was about 15 years old. And then various stuff, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, most of the anime-related titles. And then when I went to college, I met a gentleman who was one of my RAs, and he just one day was just like, "Oh, you play card games? Do you want to come learn how to play Magic?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he brought in this big box of 10,000 cards, and we sat together and built a deck, and we would just jam games on weekends, and it was awesome.
Nice. Mike, how'd you get it? Chris, how did you get into Magic the Gathering?
So I actually got into Magic the Gathering because there was a comic book shop down the street from my house that I used to go to all the time, and I used to just hang out in there and browse the comic books, read the comic books, and then every Wednesday they would have a group of people that came in that would play Magic the Gathering in the back, and I used to hang out and watch them play. And a lot of the art on the cards looked really cool. A lot of the different types of abilities were really cool. And one of the guys the one day was like, "Hey, you love watching us? Do you want to learn how to play?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And this was back in 2001, so I was super young back then. And I was just watching them, and he tried to teach me, and I got a little confused. And I was used to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, where we played by our own rules. There wasn't any set specific rules that we had to do. So when they gave me my first cards, I kind of just didn't really know what I was doing. Was just playing things as I wanted to. But as I grew up and learned the actual mechanics and how to play the game, it became a really big hobby and a really big part of my life.
I got my start late in life. I got it in college. Actually, I learned a little bit about it from my brother who started in college, and I every now and then I would visit him there, and I saw him and his friends play some Magic. I just never got into it because I had no idea what was going on. But later in college, my last group of friends, they got me into it because one of them was already into it, and we just started buying decks and building decks, and they picked it up pretty quick. I didn't. It took me a while to figure out actually how to build a deck effectively because I would make 100 card decks that would not work at all. I just put in cards that sounded cool and did cool stuff. How was learning Magic the Gathering for both of you? Chris, you want to go?
Yeah. So when I started when I was younger, it was very difficult because there's a lot. Magic's one of the more complicated games to play because there's different levels to each interaction you have with every card. So you have to really know what you're doing and when to do things to kind of get a real good basis of the game. So when I was younger, it was kind of just free play for me. I was just playing things at will, not really paying attention to the rules. But then when I got probably, I want to say, into late middle school, early high school, I started really taking it seriously and learning the more mechanics of the game and how to play. And it was very simple for me because I'm a visual learner, so I was able to watch people play, and it helped me learn how to play. And we didn't have YouTube and all that that wasn't that big back then. We didn't have a lot of Twitch tournaments we could watch. So it was literally just going to a card shop, playing with other people, trial and error, learning through my mistakes. And a big key in Magic that is one of the best ways to learn how to play, and one of the ways I learned how to play, is called RTC. I left out a letter because I didn't want to get too vulgar, but RTC, read the card. Normally it's RTX.
Oh, okay.
The viewers can fill in the F there, but RTC, read the card. So that's one of the big ways I learned how to play Magic, was just reading the card. Because sometimes you don't fully read the card and you try to do something with it that you can't. And that just simply reading the cards helped me gain more of an understanding and how to learn and play the game at an effective high level.
Yeah, I totally get read the card. Actually, I thought of like two facts. They haven't made AI able to, I don't even think, comprehend MTG yet or beat it. I can't remember which is which, but I think they tried AI against MTG and it just can't do it. So that's good. That's good because that means Skynet is a little further off. And I want to say, I saw it on YouTube. One of the channels, he talks about science stuff, but he's a huge MTG nerd. I want to say he was able to make it a calculator. I can't remember the episode, but it's a.
Oh, it was Because Science.
Yes.
And he builds a Magic the Gathering computer.
Yes. It's insane.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But Mike, how was learning Magic the Gathering and deck building?
For me, I would say because I got into Magic so much later in my life and in my card gaming career, and I had somebody that was an exceptional teacher that took the time that would grind games with me, that would let me make my own mistakes and then let me rewind and figure out what I was doing wrong. I had a relatively easy time. It was basically like having a one-on-one tutor to play Magic. It doesn't, and it definitely helps that, again, like I've been playing card games since I was 13, 14, 15 years old, and going to locals, going to competitive events, so eventually they all kind of blend in a little bit.
You remember what the first deck you built or bought was?
The first deck I built was during the first Ravnica block, and it was tokens, green Golgari, so green-black tokens, and I had Fallen Angel. So I would play Fallen Angel and sack a whole bunch of tokens and go in for the kill. It was awesome.
Mike, what do I keep on doing? I'm sorry. Chris. Your middle name's not Mike, is it? Damn. All right. First deck you built.
Okay, so first deck I built. So first non-deck that was given to me that I built was so at the time when I played was around a time called Odyssey Block, and there was a card called Psychotog. And Psychotog was one colorless, a blue, and a black, and he had two abilities. He was a 1/2. Two abilities. You could discard a card from your hand to give him +1/+1, or you could remove two cards from your graveyard to give him +1/+1. He was the OP deck at the time, like he was the best deck. That's what everybody played. They played him and some sort of madness type theme, which madness is when you discard this card from your hand, you can pay its madness cost to cast it. So I, of course, didn't have the funds to build the really good Psychotog decks, but I was able to come across a few Psychotogs myself. So I built like this blue-black sort of janky Psychotog deck that kind of just aimed to kill everybody else's creatures and keep my Psychotog alive, which wasn't the best goal because the only creature in the deck was Psychotog, and if they killed my Psychotogs, I was just done. But I was young, I was little, I had no idea what I was doing, so I just kind of went with the card that looked cool, and Psychotog has really cool art. So I went with him, and it was really fun deck to play because, like, I was a little kid. I didn't know there was like combat tricks and stuff where people could like stop what I was doing. So like I'd attack on my Psychotog and be like, yes, I can discard my whole hand and kill them. And I'd discard my whole hand and they'd be like, oh man, sorry, we're gonna like fog you and make you do no damage and then kill you on the next turn. I was like, alright, cool. Whatever, man. It happens. But I had fun because I discarded my hand and felt like I did something. But that was the first deck that I built.
Yeah, I remember getting excited. You think you're about to do something and then they're like, nope. No, the first one I built was a vampire deck. I'm obsessed with vampires, and I was hoping I would be able to build one, and I was. And it's the one I've refined the most. Now it has like a bunch of legendary vampires in there.
That's awesome.
Tribal is definitely like a really easy way to teach and to get into Magic. Unification across, cards and synergies is really nice.
100%.
What are some of your favorite decks you have now?
You take that one first, Pope. I gotta think.
Oh man, that I have now or of all time?
Surprise me.
All right, because I have decks that I absolutely love. Back in Zendikar Standards, this is 2010, 2011, I had a deck called Bieber Fever, and it was a super fast mono green aggro deck that could kill somebody on turn 3. It was awesome, and it was named after Justin Bieber.
Oh my god.
I single-handedly played against that deck a few times, and it was very fun to play.
Oh yeah. There's nothing like there's a gentleman we played with who is very temperamental, and on turn 3 I slammed down a card called Beastmaster's Ascension, and when you attack with 7 creatures with Beastmaster's Ascension, they'll get +5/+5. And I was attacking with 0 ones, so he was taking 35 damage out of nowhere. He was like, "Give me that card, let me see it." I think as far as constructed formats go, I've always leaned heavily towards aggro decks or combo. Probably a topic that we'll start gushing about relatively soon is the format Commander. And in Commander, I have a whole litany of decks, but I can tell you that my 2 decks that I love the most are Slimefoot the Stowaway, which is sort of a combo mid-rangey deck, and then my Risk the Redeemed green-white token deck.
You think of yours, Chris?
Yeah, so my favorite deck right now, my favorite deck of all time are the same exact deck because I always have it built all the time. That's Rafika the Many. So it's a commander deck where the commander is Rafik. He costs colorless, green, blue, and a white.
So he's a monkey?
No, he is.
Lion
I
King.
actually would like that.
Rafiki.
Yeah,
I actually have the pop of Rafik behind me. Yeah, I wanted to get him altered into Rafik from Lion King, but he's a knight, human knight, and so what he is, he's a 3/3, and he has an ability called Exalted. So whenever a creature attacks alone, it gets +1/+1. His other ability is whenever a creature attacks alone, it gets double strike, so it deals double the damage. It deals first strike damage, and it deals normal combat damage. So I always, at some point in my life, even when I stopped playing Magic, I always had some iteration of Rafik build. Whether it was a budget build, an expensive build, but it always revolved around making Rafik big enough to attack somebody in one attack and kill them. So it's always been my favorite deck. It's still my favorite deck. He's one of my favorite cards in Magic, and till this day, even if I sold all my cards tomorrow, I would still keep him and the deck together. They would be the only things I kept.
Nice. My favorite is the Samurai deck I built. It's a red and white deck, and what's really cool about it is that Samurai have their own abilities called Bushido. I had to get out I found my decks this time. Remember last time I couldn't find them? I found them. They were in another shelving unit. So Bushido is when this blocks or becomes blocked, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And I have other cards in here that basically, I don't know, like all Samurai block at the same time or something like that, where it's like devastating to the opponent. And that was another one I was like, I'd really like to build like a Samurai or a Ninja deck. And lo and behold, there's Samurai and Ninja. There's just more Samurai than there are Ninja.
Not so much anymore.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. This is probably like my oldest deck.
Yeah, one of the newer sets came out that had they added a lot of new Samurai or ninjas to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you mentioned Commander, but what other formats are there? I play casually, so it's either one-on-one, we just play until one of us is dead, or like it's a group of people playing until someone's dead. The only other format I've ever played is Arch Enemy, which I really think is cool because you have these bigger cards that either like help or hurt, and sometimes it's helping the arch enemy, sometimes it's not helping the arch enemy.
They're called schemes.
Yes. Have you guys played Arch Enemy?
A few times.
Yeah, a handful of times.
Yeah, a few times.
It's where I got my dragon deck, and I just kind of built it from there. But what other formats are there before because I've never played Commander, but I know you guys can really inform me and the audience about it. But what other forms of play are there?
So as far as like competitive formats, a game where you could go to an event, the first is Vintage. Vintage takes the entire catalog of Magic the Gathering, with very few exceptions, and some of the cards are limited to one copy per deck. This is your like powerful, play your entire hand on turn one, draw 14 cards, and then kill someone. The next step up after Vintage is Legacy. Legacy is the same. It's the whole history of Magic the Gathering with a more restricted ban list. So these super powerful cards that you could play in Vintage, you can no longer play in Legacy. It's highly governed. They make adjustments to it relatively frequently to sort of keep the power down. It's probably one of the... If you want to get into like old school Magic and start looking into older cards and things, it's probably like the easiest entry level. After Legacy, you have Modern. Modern was a format made in, I believe it was in 2011 or 2012, and it includes all cards printed from, is it 4th? Not 4th.
No, it's 7th edition.
7th edition.
8th edition.
8th, yes, from 8th forward. So it's like 2004. And it's all cards with a modern card frame. And again, it's another environment for wild combos. It's basically JV Legacy.
I have a question about the modern one. Okay, so there are cards that do get reprinted through all editions.
Mm-hmm.
Are you allowed to have the original copy in a modern deck?
Yep.
Okay.
As long as it was printed in a set that is modern legal.
I didn't know how strict these could be. It's like, no, it has to be the latest edition of this card. It can't be the first edition.
No, you gotta flex on people with your beta lightning bolts. That's how you do it. I wish I had beta lightning bolts.
Hundreds of dollar lightning bolts that do the same amount of damage as my $1 lightning bolt.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to ask that before I forgot.
Lightning bolt. Now there's a common that always seems to be $1.
And what comes after modern?
Modern.
Or is it?
Chris, you're probably a little bit better. Is historic still a thing in paper Magic, or is that on Arena only?
It's just Arena historic. It's so what you have after modern will typically be, it was Pioneer. I don't know, that was pre-COVID, so I'm not sure. It was starting to get some traction pre-COVID, but there was a lot of like really, really broken decks, and they had to do a lot of banning and tweaking. So it's still a format, but it's not as, I don't think it's got a grip yet, obviously, because you can't play paper Magic as much right now. But that was the next format after modern, with set-wise. So like the earlier sets you can play.
And then after Pioneer would be Standard. So Standard is probably the preferred constructed format as far as Wizards of the Coast is involved, or concerned. Let's see, for when I played Standard, I have not played Standard in a very long time, outside of like weird budgety decks. But Standard is typically the most recent 7 sets of cards. There's a rotation that pulls sets away, generally to, like, on the business side, it's to generate revenue, but it's also exceptionally good for the health of the game. You're removing problem cards, you're letting the environment grow in different directions. Some of the best FNMs I've ever won were set rotations where I just smashed mono red together and just rolled over everyone because nobody had any idea what cards were good yet.
Yeah, typically when a standard rotation happens, mono red is the safest deck to choose because it's just the quickest, and people are trying out new things that may be a little bit slower or might not have enough synergy yet because they don't know the most optimal cards to play. And red is always just turn my guy sideways and try to kill you as fast as possible.
But after Standard, you sort of have a litany of casual formats. The most popular format in Magic the Gathering right now is the Commander format. But you also have formats like Pauper. Pauper is like the ultimate Legacy Light. It is only cards printed at common. Can't play anything higher than that. So if it was at one point printed as a common, you can use it. And you have Archenemy, Plane Chase. So and then there are like board games that were made. Like there's
I didn't know that.
Rivals. Yeah, there's a Magic the Gathering like Rivals of Ixalan board game or Explorers of Ixalan that was based around one of the most recent sets, and you play Magic the Gathering and you can spend your mana instead of playing cards to explore the islands of Ixalan and try to get to the center, and you flip these tiles and the tiles give you random effects. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I played it once or twice.
That kind of sounds like I've never actually thought it all the way through, but I've always thought of like if I ever played a wizard again in D&D, I would talk with my DM and see if I could like get like some magic cards and use those and actually like spend mana to. I don't know. I'd have to figure it out more, but I think that would be pretty cool to integrate the two of them. And that board game you described kind of sounds like that's what it's doing.
Well, there are Magic the Gathering companion books for Dungeons & Dragons, because Wizards of the Coast produces Magic and Dungeons & Dragons.
Now, since Commander is the most popular of styles to play right now, why don't you inform me and the rest of the audience how Commander works and the different types of decks you can use?
Commander is a 100-card format. It is strict to that size. The other important part is that you're restricted in deck building. So you pick a legendary creature to be your commander. So in this case, I actually have my Slimefoot the Stowaway deck up on a second screen right now. So Slimefoot the Stowaway is a 2/3 for 1, a black, and a green. So what's really important is the black and the green. That becomes the color identity of my deck. So the only cards I can play are black, green, colorless, or artifacts, and obviously lands. From that point forward, you can only use one copy of each card except for basic lands. So it does take a little bit of the cost away. Like if you want to buy one really good card that you can use in multiple decks, you can switch it around. So only needing one of each is really great. And then from that point, it's an open palette. You can freaking paint whatever you want. I have decks that I use the commander just for the color identity. I have decks that synergize around the commander. Chris had brought up his Rafik deck. That's an aspect of commander called Voltron, where you make your dude big and then you crush someone.
That's pretty cool.
You can see traditional styles of play in Commander that you would see at an Open or a GP. You see mid-range, you see combo, you see control, you see aggro. I would say that the format leans heavily towards combo decks because it is a multiplayer political format. So obviously you're making deals, you're yelling at your friends, you're trying to kill off people who are a problem, you're trying to get them out of the game, or you're trying to win all at once. You're trying to knock out 3 other people when you could be individually targeting people. It's really cool. You play with 40 life, and then there's a little side roll for victory. It's called commander damage. So if your commander deals combat damage to an opponent, it comes off of their life total, but it also tallies up. So if I hit you with Slimefoot, you would take 2 damage off your life total, putting you at 38, and you'd have 2 commander damage from Slimefoot. If Slimefoot ever dealt 21 commander damage, which is half plus 1, you'd lose. So Chris goes for the 21 kill with his Rafik deck, where my Slimefoot deck is a sort of combo, swippity swap, deal damage to everybody all at once kind of deck. So I'm going for that 40 damage, where Chris is going for that 21.
All right, I have a question about the deck building for this. And maybe because I'm just not as good at building decks. But because, aside from land, you can only have 1 of each card in there, does it make it more difficult to get to 100?
Not to get to 100. It makes it more difficult to get under 100.
Really?
Yeah.
Because you will, when you put your commander in front of you, and you take your collection out and you start to build, you're going to keep throwing cards in and throwing cards in. So typically you want to have, depending on the amount of colors in your deck, anywhere from 34 to 42 lanes in your deck, depending on how many colors and how high of casting cost your cards are. But let's say on the safe side, for sake of talking, we'll go with 40 lanes in your deck. So that's 60 slots. But one of those slots has to be your commander. So that's 59 slots. So if you start taking cards out and you start putting cards aside, saying, I want to play this, I want to play this, I want to play this, when I build a typical commander deck, I'm going to get to like 130 cards, and I'm going to have to start making cards.
Oh, wow.
Commander lets you express yourself in a way that other Magic formats don't, because Commander can be way more casual than other formats. Your standard, modern, vintage, legacy, those are the money-making formats where you go to competitions. You can still have a little bit of a creative side to those, but there's optimal decks for each of those formats. Like, there's really no variance. Most decks are 60-card optimized, so you will know what your opponent's drawing. If you know what kind of deck they're playing, you'll know what's going to happen with their certain interactions with those decks. But when it comes to Commander, there's 99 cards, so there's way more variance than there would be in these competitive formats. So Commander, you can be a little bit more expressive with your decks. There are top tier decks, which are called CDH decks, and those ones are the top tier optimized decks that win on like turn 1, 2, and 3. But those decks, when playing against other CDH decks, tend to get slowed down because they're all optimized to stop each other. So the way you if somebody sits down with a CDH deck and you're playing your casual decks, you and your friends need to just take them out as fast as possible so you guys can have an enjoyable, fun game of EDH. But there are multiple ways to play EDH as well as build your decks. So everyone plays this format differently, because it's the most expressive format to play.
You'll hear Chris, he had bounced back between Commander and EDH. So the Commander is sort of the adopted term for the game, or for the format. It was made official, and they started producing Commander product. But EDH stands for Elder Dragon Highlander. So in the history of Magic, back in the day, there are five Elder Dragons, and they all have 7 power and 7 toughness. So if you get hit by them 3 times, that's 21 damage. This format was actually created by a whole handful of judges that were kind of bored and wanted to put something together.
Nice.
And the original decks were made with these Elder Dragon cards. Like Chris's boy, Nicol Bolas.
Right there.
I built a deck around him.
I was wondering what that was.
My dragon deck is built around Nicol Bolas.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's my buddy.
So the two terms are interchangeable. The debate between CEDH and regular EDH or regular Commander is like a futile endeavor. It's a can of worms that usually results in incredible saltiness.
Is it just an argument of semantics?
It really is.
It's more like, so EDH is a big ego format. So a lot of people who build their decks take a lot of pride in their decks. Like I said, it's an expression of you as a player. Your EDH, your commander deck, EDH deck. I'm gonna typically probably say EDH more. Pope will probably say commander more. It's just like an expression of you. I know that there's cards that I play in Rafik that aren't as good, but I play them because I enjoy them and I like them. And what I was starting to say about it being an ego format is you put your heart and soul into your commander decks that you build. So when you sit down against somebody who found their deck online that can win on turn 1, 2, and 3, and you get crushed, it really hurts your ego because you feel like you built your deck very, very strong. But this person sat down with a $1,000 plus optimized deck that is made to beat your deck instantly. And that's where it comes to the point where you have to kind of check your ego at that point and realize, like, hey, this is what this guy's deck's supposed to do. If I want to beat that, I need to play things that are going to beat that. So the great thing about Commander and EDH is that it's a pool. Like me, Mike, and our friends, me and Mike had CEDH decks, but we rarely used them when playing with our group of friends because they didn't have them. But our group of friends have certain play styles, and we know that we need to play certain cards in our decks to combat their play style. So that's where if you take your deck may be good against your group of friends, but if you branch out and go play at a different store or a different event, you may have cards in your deck that won't even hold a candle to some of these people because their deck has to be tuned to play against their group of friends. So it really is shot by shot based and group by group based. That's how the decks are really built, and that's how most of the people play is based off of their play group. Now, we're lucky enough, and it's lucky and unlucky enough, that our group has a lot of different play styles, and including myself, we have a lot of egos in our play group. So we sometimes don't always check our egos while we're playing, and when somebody does something salty to us, we'll do something salty back, or we'll hold a grudge going into the next game, when that's not something you should be doing in a format that is meant to be fun. Now, with your friends, obviously there's that added, like, chip on your shoulder where you don't want to lose to your friends, but at the end of the day, you just need to realize, like, hey, it's a game, these are my friends, if I lose, we can shuffle up and play another one.
Right.
I can tell you that in games where I've sat down with Chris and we have, played with 2 other people and everybody got salty, like that would be the game where I won because nobody would target me and I would just like sit there and like build up my army or set up my combo and then kill everyone. And there also when I play with Chris, it's like really unfortunate for everybody else. Chris and I have this unspoken understanding that we will kill the other 2 players and then duke it out one-on-one after they're gone.
And the funny thing was, too, when Mike took a break, he came back, and when he started playing, he knew my power level, but didn't know everyone else's, so he knew I was the biggest threat, and he knew that he had to take me out first, because I would eventually, like he said, get ignored by everyone else, build a giant board, and kill everybody at once. Because he knew what my decks were, because we always stayed in contact even when he took a break for a while, and he knew a lot. He knows my play style. He knows, because me and Mike used to play test with each other. We used to play decks against each other, so we know how each other plays. We know the styles we like to play. So in that sense, like his mindset, because of the people he played with when he was on a break from coming to the shop we played at, they were more like take out the biggest threat and then win the game. So when he came back to playing with our group at the shop, he knew that I could be the biggest threat at times, so he needed to take me out and then work his way through the other sides of the board. And that's where Commander brings an added level of assessing the threats. Commander really works everything you learn in Magic, and it really puts it all together in one format, and it makes you pay attention. It really makes you look at every single aspect because it's multiplayer. So in a one-on-one game, you have what's across from you and what's on your side of the board. In a multiplayer game, you have 2 other boards on top of the one guy sitting across from you and your own. So you really have to be diligent and think, if I do this to this guy, how is it going to affect me later with these guys if I waste this on this guy? So you really have to be on your toes and kind of figure out the most optimal way to play your cards. And sometimes the most optimal way of playing your cards is not doing anything at all and letting your opponents beat themselves. Like Mike said, he would let his opponents beat themselves, build a massive board, and then just kill them.
Have either of you been to the conventions? I've not gone to a convention, unfortunately.
I have been to events, but participated in very few. I played in a national qualifier, playing the sweetest deck that Chris brewed. It's mono brown, no colors in the deck at all.
I love that.
And everybody at the event was like, "Oh man, your deck is so cool!" And I was like, "My boy built it. I had to bring it."
It was a very fun deck.
And I played in a Pro Tour qualifier, but then as far as like locals and limited events, I haven't really played in any high end stuff. I've gone to they're called Magic Fests now, but they were Grand Prix at the time. I've gone to Grand Prix. I've gone to Pro Tour Philadelphia and hung out. Got to meet a couple of my Magic idols. So it's always a blast.
So for me, I played in 3 or 4 high-level tournaments. I played in what Mike said, a PTQ, which is if you win that, you go to a Pro Tour. That there are no longer PTQs anymore. Now you have to win a tournament to get put into what was called a PTQ to win that to go to a Pro Tour. So back when I played, you just had to win one tournament. The Pro Tour was like one of their bigger tournaments throughout the year. It was a big money tournament. So the one I played in was for Pro Tour. I forget the name of the city in Japan, but it was for a city in Japan. And if you came in first or second in that tournament, you got a flight out to Japan, entry into the tournament, but you would have to find your own lodging.
Nice.
So I actually finished in 11th place in that tournament. I missed the top 8 by 1 game. I lost. So the way Magic does is they do like 7 or 8 round robins, or not round robins, Swiss. 7 or 8 Swiss. And your record, based on that, the top 8 people with the best records go on to play each other in a round robin. And the top 2 players play each other for a big prize, but both of them get invited to the Pro Tour.
Oh, nice.
So I actually came in 11th, and if I would have won my last match of the day, I would have made it to the top 8 and could have played for the Pro Tour to make qualify for the Pro Tour. My second PTQ, I actually came in 26th, and the first one was out of like 800, 900 people. Second one was out of 500 people. And then most recently, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I played in a Star City event, which was a team event. So one person plays Modern, one person plays Standard, and one person plays Legacy. And you can talk to your teammates and help them out while they're playing. You're sitting next to each other, playing against another team of 3. And we actually placed, I'm pretty sure we placed in the top 20 in that one as well, too, with my team. It was very, very fun.
That sounds crazy.
Yeah, I went to that event and I was like the manager, like run and get him water and stuff.
Pope was super clutch for our team. We made sure he was there if we needed anything. It was very, very we were very appreciative because us 3. So we had one of our buddies Harrison and another friend of ours Aiden. And we were all super energetic and hyped in the morning because we drank our coffees. We were ready to go. And then we didn't realize how draining it was going to be. Like, Aiden and Harrison had played in solo Star City events where it was just you versus somebody else, and they're a little bit faster because you don't have 3 people playing at a time. But this was a very, very draining tournament, and especially because you have another sense of, like, you have another aspect of the game there, too, because whoever finishes their match first can now go down and has all the free time in the world to help the other 2 play. So the way we did it was because I was the most knowledgeable about all of the formats, they put me with the fastest deck that would win or lose the fastest, so that if I won or lost, regardless, I could slide down, sit in between the 2, and help those 2 guys make their plays for the rest of that round. And it's really cool to play in a team event because you get that aspect added onto it. It was really fun.
Yeah, I remember you have to kind of be stoic when you observe. You can't really like fidget around too much. You can't move. You just kind of have to be silent.
You gotta have a poker face.
Yeah, you'd see like it's exceptionally dynamic because Harrison and Aiden both played. I think Aiden played a heavy combo deck.
He played the Renin 6 land control deck.
Yeah. And Harrison had played blue-white control, and Harrison is one of the best control players I've ever met in my entire life. But like having two minds work in one, like work as one in combination with those kind of decks is beyond next level, because the decks that they were playing were so like psychologically intensive. I as a Magic player, at least if I play a constructed format like Standard, I can't do that. I gotta play turn people sideways and kill them.
Yeah, the deck that I played, I had zero experience on. I played it the FNM before, the night before we went to the tournament, and I did very well with that deck, only because I knew the mechanics and the concept of the deck. The biggest thing about those team events too, which it's a really cool aspect, and I coach sports, so I was kind of like our coach for our team, because we got really, really, really devastated round one. We just got rolled. No one on our team won a match, and Harrison is a player that will harp on the negatives. So I literally, when we lost, had to pull him aside and not actually smack him in the face, but give him like a figurative smack in the face and be like, dude, listen, one game, we're winning every game from here on out. Stop, not a big deal, who cares, round one, doesn't matter. We have a lot more Magic to play throughout the day. And that kid played some of the best Magic I've ever seen him play for the rest of the day.
Nice.
He was locked in, laser focused, and it was so cool because Aiden was the youngest player on our team, being, I think, 14 or 15 at the time. And this kid was probably the highest level of play out of all of us because he played the most competitive out of us three. But he had some moments where we had to be like, dude, listen, look at it from this angle. Because it's always good to have a fresh pair of eyes on something, because a lot of people will tunnel and see things the way they see it instead of being able to see it from a different aspect. That's why I love those team events so much, because you get that fresh eyes from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard at conventions that you can get into these groups where they just open up, what is it, like 10 to the mystery packs, basically?
So yeah.
Yeah. Is there like 10 in a pack like that?
There are what are called side events at conventions and Magic Fest and stuff. There are, one of the things that we didn't touch on, is something that I'm not too connected with, is what's called limited Magic. And a common format is called Draft, where they take 8 people, and they give you 3 packs, and you open your packs, take a card, you pass to the right, then the left, then the right, and you build a deck based on the cards that have become available to you. It's fun, it's frustrating, and there are people that are limited masters. And those fire all the time. There's also a format called Sealed, where you get 6 packs, and within those 6 packs you have to build a deck. I played the event that Chris did, the team tournament. I played with a friend of ours, Luke, and we actually did Team Sealed, where it was Two-Headed Giant, where we both played together. And we built our decks, and we did awful. And then we set down the cards in front of Chris, and he was like, why don't you build these decks?
And so these decks are in limited events, which are sealed and draft. They're all 40-card decks. They're not 60-card decks. And the event, whoever's hosting the event supplies you with the lands. You don't have to worry about the lands. The biggest thing with these is I think sealed is probably the most fun format for a newer player, only because it's straight luck. You're opening 6 packs. You don't know what you're going to get. It's not everybody has a fair chance of getting really good cards or really bad cards. So it's all about how you just put what you're given together and play with that. And I think Sealed's really cool because it lets people build decks that you never would see in the game of Magic because a lot of the cards are really bad. But in Sealed, they're actually good because your pool of cards is so limited.
So, legally speaking, is 40 the smallest you can build?
Only in Sealed events.
Only, Sealed and Draft.
Yes.
Right.
So in constructed, like vintage, anything non-commander has to be minimum 60.
60, okay.
Yes, anything non-commander, and then anything commander has to be 100 even.
I would imagine that like 60 and less. I mean, I can see that 40 could be a decent deck, but I would think anything less than 40 wouldn't function at all, really.
Yeah, because you would eventually be. So, like, if you had a 20-card deck, you got to think if you want more non-land cards than land cards. So, like, a fourth of your deck, a fourth or a third of your deck is typically lands. So, like, if you do that, if you do a fourth, you have 4 lands or you have 5 lands in your deck.
Yeah.
You're not gonna be able to cast anything that costs more than 5.
Yeah, it'd have to be like
cost 6 or 7.
You'd have to have some like really good burn cards or like a poison deck. Because the thing
so
was
like a mono red deck would love to have a 20-card deck because then they're just jamming lightning bolts in your face.
Yeah, well, is it? How many poison points do you know? It's like 10. 10. Yeah, it's not. So you don't need nearly as much either. So a poison deck would probably work out great.
Yeah, depends on how fast or slow the format is. But you have there's one actual really cool card in Magic the Gathering called Battle of Blitz, which when you play this card, if you have 250 cards in your deck, you win the game. It's an enchantment that you play. If you have 250 cards, you win the game. So there was actually a competitive deck that played that card. One of the judges used to play at our locals, and whenever Battle of Wits was in the standard format, would actually play his Battle of Wits deck, and he kept the deck in a giant box, a giant cardboard box, because it was huge to shuffle, and if he left it on the table and somebody bumped into it, it would fall out and get knocked over, so he kept it in double sleeved in a giant box. And I've actually seen him win a few FNMs with that deck and have people get very, very angry with one of those FNMs.
Have either of you ever built a deck just to fuck with people?
I don't think people specifically, but deck to just fuck around in the tournament and make people miserable. Probably, I think I might have built like a turn 2 infect deck or something like that was really obnoxious. That was in standard, but I don't think I've ever built anything to specifically hate on one of my opponents, but I think I've definitely built some things that like made the people I play against not want to play against me.
Well, now that I've found my black and white deck, I'm starting to remember more of what's in there. So there's a lot of tap destroy in here, but there's also like, how could I forget that quickly? Oh, there's also like, what is Day of Judgment, one of them where it just clears the board basically?
Uh-huh.
And that's a white, isn't it?
Yes.
And then I have
two white.
I have basically the black version of it. I can't remember, but I have
Damnation, probably.
I have at least 2 of each in there, and it's just a deck where I'm like, I'm gonna screw you with you.
It's a control deck.
Exactly, but that you are controlling creatures. So if you run into a deck where somebody plays, their strategy does not revolve around creatures, you just have a little bit more difficult of a time because a lot of your cards are geared towards creatures, which brings us to the topic of a sideboard. Sideboards are a 15-card mini deck that are outside of the game that you can access after the first game of a 2 out of 3. So after your first game, whether you win or lose it, when you're playing best 2 out of 3, you can take cards from your sideboard, and put them into your main deck. You don't have to take any cards out if you don't want to. You can put the full 15 in, but that's a little risky because you're making your deck less optimal because you're adding more variants and more cards. So you'll typically want to replace cards like you would have a sideboard that would have things that would gain you life, let's say, so that you can combat the decks that are trying to burn you out, and you may take out some of those Damnations and Wrathagons because they're not as important because the deck you're playing against doesn't have creatures.
And there are very when you move into sideboarding and start to discuss that kind of stuff, there are even very specific cards that are printed. One of them, the first one that immediately came to my mind was called Flash Freeze, and it's 1 and a blue, and it counters a red spell or a green spell. And at the time, the time I played it, there was a card called Mana Leak. And Mana Leak is 1 and a blue, and you counter target spell unless its opponent plays 3. Well, in that format that I was playing in, it was better to take out 2 or 3 Mana Leaks and put in Flash Freeze because they were guaranteed to counter the spells if your opponent was playing red or green.
And then there's another aspect of sideboarding that some people like to do, which we call the Philly fake out, where you shuffle your whole sideboard in, and then you take 15 cards out. So make sure your opponent doesn't know how many cards you're actually sideboarding in. Because when you play these higher level tournaments, everyone's decks are optimized. Everyone is playing the tier 1 decks that there's deck lists online that you can look up to see what people are playing. So if I'm playing against you and I know what deck you're playing, you know what deck I'm playing, you're more likely to be able to guess what cards I'm putting in from my sideboard and taking out from my main deck. But if I shuffle 15 cards into my deck, you have no idea what 15 cards I'm taking out. So it gets a little bit of like a head game. There's also, back when, in the same format that Pope was talking about when he was talking about Mana Leak and Flash Freeze, there was a deck that would completely change its strategy through sideboarding. So the main deck was revolved around a card called Pyromancer's Ascension. And what that card did was it was an enchantment that whenever you cast a spell that shared a name with a card that was already in your graveyard, Pyromancer's Ascension would gain a counter. And then when it had a certain amount of counters on it, if you casted a spell that shared a name with a card in your graveyard, you would copy. So the deck was all about just casting cards that draw cards and manipulate the top of your deck, and then eventually you just cast a bunch of lightning bolts and that were copied and burn your opponent out. So that deck didn't have any creatures. So your opponent would be like, oh, okay, I can take everything that would destroy creatures out of my deck and bring in things that are good against spells, that are good against non-creature spells. But what you would do is, you would bring in this card called Splinter Twin and Deceiver Exarch. And what Deceiver Exarch would do was, it was a two colorless and a blue for a creature that had Flash. So Flash means you can play it at instant speed. And when it comes into play, it's a 1/4, so 1 power, 4 toughness. And when it comes into play, it has the ability to either tap or untap target permanent. So what he would do is he would come into play and he could untap himself. So then you would attach the card Splinter Twin to him. Splinter Twin was an enchantment that enchanted a creature, and it cost 2 colorless and 2 red, and it gave the creature the ability that the creature now has the ability to tap it and make a copy of itself. So you would make a copy of your Deceiver Exarch, the copy would come into play, and the copy would gain the ability of untapping another permanent, and it would untap the Deceiver Exarch that had the Splinter Twin on it, and you could make infinite Deceiver Exarchs with haste and attack your opponent all in the same turn and kill them. So that deck would literally fake its opponent out. Eventually people caught on to it because they realized, all right, if they're playing Pyromancer's Ascension, they're most likely going to board into the Splinter Twin. But then you can even just do that Philly fake out where you shuffle all 50 cards and take out your full sideboard and never change your game plan. So that was a way where your sideboard is a brand new deck. It manipulates the way you play and your opponent thinks you're playing.
Nice. So when you're playing, I'm sure you've seen multiple different layouts for when people are laying down their cards. How do you typically play? I typically play, and this is, I guess most people play this way. Mana is in front of you, and then your creatures, enchantments, or your creatures are in front of the mana. I have my enchantments and artifacts to at the top of the deck, and then the graveyard to the left of the deck. But I've seen someone where it's reversed. They'll have the mana in front for whatever reason, and they'll have the creatures in the back. How do you guys?
I'll let Pope take this first because I'm a dirty savage, so Pope can go first.
Oh God.
Well, I play with the lands as close to me as possible, the base, and then I just kind of put my stuff wherever. When you play Commander, which is pretty much the exclusive format that I play right now, you end up with a lot of stuff. So there's no real rhyme or reason or how I set this down. I just put my mana in the back so I have access to it easily, and then we'll let the Dirty Savage take his...
Yeah, so
Oh,
what
God.
I do is nowadays frowned upon in Magic, which I don't know when it became frowned upon. I don't know why it became frowned upon, but I play with my lanes in the front. I've always played with my lanes in the front. At the top of my playmat are my lanes, and my creatures are underneath. I have always played like that since I was younger. The people I played with played that way, and it's just something that I have always done. And I've actually got judges called on me at bigger tournaments, and I've had them been asked to switch my lands with my creatures. But that's just always something I've done and been comfortable with. But like Pope said, after my mana up at the top, everything else is kind of just optimally placed for how I need it or where I need it to be so that I can see it the best. For some reason, for me, I feel like it's more important that my opponent can see my lands more, because lands, and it might even be a little bit of a tell for my side, but I feel like if your opponent, I feel like for me when I play, I want to know how much mana my opponent has available at all time. So I would rather see their lands closer to me than their creatures, because what they have tapped and untapped can tell me what they have in their hand or what they have the ability to do. So lands, my philosophy was that I thought my opponents would always rather see my mana base to see what I could potentially be doing than see my creatures. But other people, have different philosophies, and I think with more and more exposure to mainstream, like through Twitch and through Arena and Magic Online, where those platforms make you play with your lands in the back and your creatures in the front, I think more people are accustomed to seeing that, so they want to see that when playing their opponent. Now, the people I play with and play against at my locals and my play group, they don't care. They're like, whatever. They know that's me. They know I'm not going to change it unless somebody genuinely asked me to and had a real rhyme or reason why they wanted me to change it. But again, I've only had a handful of people at big tournaments tell me I needed to switch, and that's just because it was confusing them because they were newer players, and I had no problem switching because they were newer players, and I played for a while. But yeah, I mean, I don't know why it's frowned upon. I don't know when it became frowned upon, but people call me a savage for playing with my lands.
So when you guys have multiple of the same card out, I mean, particularly land, do you start like having? Let's see if I can get a good example going. Do you do it like this, or do you do it like this, and you just tap accordingly? And how do you?
I kind of overlap them.
You overlap them like that, and how do you tap? I've seen people tap like this, and I've seen people tap like this.
The people that only go 45 degrees are monsters.
Thank you.
The worst
Yeah.
I'm a monster. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So from a competitive standpoint, that's a very bad thing to do, only because...
What, the 45?
Yeah, only because your opponent could think that you're trying to not fully tap your lands and like potentially untap them or try to cheat them. So you always want to full tap your lands, full sideways, full 90-degree tap your lands, because then they actually know that the lane is actually tapped. In a tournament, if you tapped your lands that way, someone could call a judge on you to come over and give you a warning and tell you that you need to fully tap them because it's misrepresenting board state. Because if you look at the way Magic is played, the card says it has to be turned on its side to be tapped.
Oh, I've always done it the way because it's faster.
Yeah, no, and like playing with your friends may be okay with that. Like some people might, and I honestly don't think you're trying to cheat or trying to get one over on anybody. But in a tournament setting, a lot of people are playing for money or have paid a lot of money to be in these tournaments, so they want you to play by the rules that they play by and that everyone holds to.
And when you're doing like enchantments or equipment, do you do the same format?
Yep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't tap the enchantments or equipment. I just tap the creature.
Yeah, that's what I typically do. But until you like explained your thought process behind mana in front, I always figured people want to read what I have out on the board so they can come up with a strategy. I never thought about it the other way. Like you want to know what mana they have tapped and not tapped, or what kind of mana, because not all mana is the same. There's some manas that do special stuff.
Exactly, and so this brings us to another topic where Magic is all about information. It's all about knowing what you have and what your opponent could have. So the way I like to play is when I'm in a competitive setting, or when I'm in a setting where I'm trying to teach somebody or have them learn from what I'm doing, I'm very talkative when I play. I'm very engaging. I'm very friendly. I try to start a dialogue with my opponent. If they don't want to do that, then I will talk to myself. And what I mean by talk to myself is if my opponent plays something, I'll sit there and out loud I'll say, all right, well, if he plays this and I do this, he can have that. And then I could do this, but he could have that. And then if it's my turn and I'm thinking about playing something, all right, well, if I do this, he might have that. But nah, I don't know. He's only got 2 mana here. And then what I'm really doing, whether I have something or not, is making my opponent think that I know what they have, or I have something that I may not have in my hand, and I'm trying to psych or bluff my opponent out.
I'll be honest, that would really annoy me.
It does. No, and it's something that I don't typically promote doing, because it is a very, very kind of cheeky tactic, because you're kind of persuading your opponent into thinking you have something you may not. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying, oh, I have this card, or I don't
right.
play this, or I'm going to do that. But just based off of what I'm saying, it makes my opponent start second guessing what they're doing, and it's a mental tactic that I'm not proud of doing, but it's something that I have done in the past that it's just a little manipulation tactic that I try to pull myself away from it, but it works. I mean, it helps me in a competitive team get a little bit of an advantage, and I'm sure someone could call a judge on me and be like, yo, he's literally just like walking me through everything he's doing without saying what he's actually doing. And the judge can be like, do this in your head. You don't need to say this out loud. Because, again, yes, I can do it in my head and I don't need to say it out loud. But there are some times where I'm an out loud thinker, and I'm genuinely doing it out loud when I have something. But also there are times where I'm trying to get one over my opponent and trying to play mind games with them.
Have you ever frustrated with anyone so much they just told you to shut the fuck up?
No, actually,
really?
Not, which is shocking. The one time I frustrated somebody to the point where they got very upset was when I was genuinely not trying to frustrate them. They played a spell, and I had 3 responses to the spell in my hand, and I was tapping my mana, and I was thinking, and you don't have to commit to the mana that you tapped. You can untap your mana until you cast the spell. So I tapped the mana, and I was thinking, and then I untapped it, and I was like, no. And then I tapped different mana because the spell costed a different amount, and I was like, I don't know if this is it. And then the guy was like, dude, you don't have anything. Stop. He's like, stop doing that. You don't have anything. You're bluffing. And then I don't know if he was doing that to make me make a move, but like I literally was like, fuck it, and I just countered his thing. And it ended up being wrong, and I shouldn't have done it, and I should have just continued my thought process. But like I got flustered because he was getting flustered, and I was just like, fuck it. And at the end of the game, I showed him. I was like, dude, I had 3 responses in my head. I was genuinely trying to think about what to do.
You sure he wasn't trying to get one up on you because he thought you were trying to get one up on him?
He thought I was trying to get one up on him, but I was genuinely trying to actually make an informed decision. But that's the thing. People run into so many different players in their Magic experience that they tend to get a certain stigma on the way certain people play or the things certain people do, whether they need to do it or not.
How about you, Mike? You have any frustrating... Well, let's just go over frustrating moments. Either you had them or someone got frustrated at you.
I can definitely tell you that I have been salty and experienced salt on both ends. I think, why Commander appeals so much outside of a competitive environment is because you get to make the deck your own. And when you try to do that in a competitive format, you take it to an event, you made that deck, it is your own, and you want to be able to use it and do cool stuff. And when people don't allow you to do your cool stuff, you're like, then why did I even build this? Why am I even playing? You get salty at them, you get salty on yourself. There are definitely times that I have not accepted the hand across the table for a GG. I think my biggest pet peeve with other players is just not paying attention. If I'm actively sitting in a game with you and you're on your phone or you're talking to somebody else, like I came to play this game. You can go home if you would rather be texting. Like you're wasting my time. We could have been done this game and I could have gone already. I think another. This is a thing that Chris and I both agree on. Particularly with Commander, because they're such a large pool of cards, is what's called proxying. And proxying is basically just, a fictitious card. You don't own it, so you write on a piece of paper or you print out a copy of a card and you just say, hey, this is XYZ card.
Yeah.
Typically, 1 or 2, 3 or 4, I'm not going to have a big deal. But I'm a very big proponent of build with what you have, and if you really want something in your deck, acquire it, or make a copy, or make a proxy, and tell everyone at the table that you're using a proxy. Like, hey, I want to try this card out in my deck. I don't know if I want to spend the $20 on it yet. Would you mind if I tried this? We have sat down across many of people who have come in with a 100-card deck and 75 cards are proxy.
Oh my god!
Even some of the basic lanes.
Yeah,
that's really cheap.
I was on a forest, so I proxied on my forest with planes.
Actually, they probably spent more on the printer ink than they would have buying the cards.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with Mike in every aspect of that. It's just proxies to me, like the reason why Commander's amazing is because for every expensive card, there is a cheaper card that does the same exact thing. It just might not be as optimal as the expensive card. So you can go out and get that card. You don't need to proxy the expensive card. You can go out and get that cheap card until you get the expensive card, until you obtain the expensive card. The only time I truly agree with proxies, and this might be where me and Mike differ, is when you have one copy of the card, but multiple decks. And I know Mike will agree with me on that. And it's so if I have a $200 card that I want to play across all my decks, I will proxy it and say, look, here's the real copy. I just don't feel like keep switching it out of every deck and keep switching it back and forth between every deck. I am also on the train that I'm just very weird because I collect Magic cards. I collect them value, not just for entertainment purposes. I collect them for value. So if I want to put a card that I own in a different deck, if I instead of proxy, I'll go out and buy another one. I'll go out and buy a second copy of it if I want to put it in the deck. If I can't physically put it in the deck, I won't put it in the deck. That's just the way I am. I build with what I have. I have a very extensive collection compared to a lot of the people that are in our play group. I have a lot of cards, so it's very, very easy for me to build a deck and have it still be good because I have a lot of the variations of the expensive cards and the cheaper versions of them. But I completely understand why people will proxy cards to try them out. But if you have no intention on buying that card or replacing it with something else, don't proxy it. Like, don't do it. It kind of, to me, the way I look at it, and I've said this a lot to a lot of people, it's like spitting in my face. Like, I spend my hard-earned money on these cards, and you may not have the resources or may not want to put the time and effort that I put into it, but I spend a lot of money on my cards. I try to make trades with people. I try to open up product. I pride myself on owning the physical copies of the cards and being able to play with my physical copies of the cards, that if you're just going to write up on a card and never intend on buying it or replacing it, you just want to write it because you know it's the best card and that's what you want to do, then that just kind of ruins the integrity of the game for me because I can do that too. I can optimize all my decks to have all the 100-hour lands in them and have all the 100-hour plus spells in them that I need them to do, but I choose not to do that because it's not a real game of Magic. It's not. I'm playing against. I can do that on the computer on a program and play against another computer or somebody else. I want to play with what you have because I want to see what your creative side decided to build with what you have at your disposal.
And there are communities that are fine with proxies. For events like Vintage and Legacy, they have proxy tournaments where you could go and they'll say, hey, for deck construction purposes, you get 5 proxies, and you can, for $5 per card, you can throw in for an extra 5 cards, like for an extra 5 proxies. Your entry fee is going to be $60, but you can play with 10 proxies in your deck. Touching back on the competitive community is 100% on proxies. They don't mind.
Wow.
They would prefer you play with the highest quality cards that are available. So they'll let you use a proxy because they want to beat the player, not the cards. And they want you to actively develop it, getting better. And that was one of the things that sort of, I don't want to say turned me off, because I did have a competitive commander deck, but I feel the same way Chris does. I don't really care to proxy. If I want 2 copies of a card, if I want a card in one deck and then the same copy in another one, I'm going to make the investment and get a second copy. And it really just comes down to preference at that point.
This kind of can segue into what is your experience and thoughts on Unhinged and Unglued?
I mean, I played Unhinged, Unglued, and Unstable. I played all 3 of them.
I didn't know there was an Unstable.
Yeah, Unstable's the newest one.
Oh, okay.
They, I mean, they're cool. They're cool to like draft. They're cool to do sealed with. As long as the card's like not super outlandish and like backbreaking. I mean, I don't care if you play it in your EDH deck. Like our one buddy Ted built a whole unstable EDH deck, but it was all about rolling dice. Like nothing in the deck was broken. It was like you could re-roll a die, or you could, if you roll this number, add this number to it. It was just a fun wonky deck. Like now there's cards. There's a card called Infinite Lotus that costs 15 mana. Tap it, it makes infinite colorless mana, and then you can pay 100 colorless mana to make 1 mana of any color you want. So that card, yeah, obviously I don't want you playing with that card. Like there's cards that are just like super absurd, but then it's like, where do you draw the line? So we're kind of just against people really playing those type of decks. Like he built it, we let him play it 1 or 2 times, and then we were kind of like, all right, let's get back to playing real Magic with real cards. Now, like if somebody else built an on-deck Commander deck, I'd be like, all right, cool, yeah, let's play on Commander, but make sure everybody else is playing on cards in their deck as well.
That kind of stuff. It's just supplementary product to me. I don't really go in there. I mean, my worst experience with the Unset was I'm pretty sure it was Unglued, and they printed a creature with Denim Walk. And if you had Genes on, none of your creatures could block the creature with Denim Walk. And I watched a grown man take his pants off so that he could block a creature for critical damage.
Yeah, I mean, that set was just wonky because you had cards like Ass Whooping. So Ass Whooping was an instant that was destroy any permanent you can see from where you're sitting.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
You could kill something on somebody else's board that wasn't even playing in a game with you. There was a card called Cheaty Face, where if you snuck the card onto the board without your opponent seeing, it was a 2/2 flyer or something like that. You snuck it onto the board without your opponent seeing it resolved, and it's on the board.
There was the one like treasure hunt card where your opponent had to close their eyes and you had to hide the card.
Oh yeah.
Somewhere in the room, and then
enter the dungeon. You had to play under the table. 5-1 under the table. There was one guy where you had to keep a finger on the card at all times, or if you let go, you had to sacrifice them. There was a card called Stop That, because at the time people were flicking their cards in their hand, which I do all the time, and it's a big pet peeve of some people. But I flick my cards in my hand, and the card was 1 black mana, target player discards card. But if they were flicking cards in their hand, you could say stop that, and you could get the cards back from your graveyard and play again.
Nice.
So, like, I think the funniest one that was the most confusing one was Rocket Powered Turbo Slug. the thing was 2 colorless and a red for a 3/1. So if I wanted to attack you with that card on your next turn, I'd say, all right, I'm attacking with Rocket Power Turbo Slug this turn. I'm going to attack you with him now. And then next turn I have to pay mana and play him, but you had to block him last turn when I said that I was attacking him.
Yeah, he's got turbo haste.
It was so confusing. Like the newest Unset Unstable, they kind of made a little bit more streamlined. There were some wonky, cool, fun things, but it wasn't like anything like that where it was like they were really making you think. There's a card in Magic called Chaos Orb. You flip it in the air, whatever it lands on, it destroys. Anything it lands, and then you have to rip it in half or something like that, right?
I was going to mention, I thought there was one, because I know less about the unhinged ones and unglued ones. My brother bought a bunch of them, but I don't remember all of them. I'm pretty sure that one of them makes you cluck like a chicken.
Yeah.
To attack or something like that. But the one I'm thinking of that you just mentioned, I want to say there was one that's called Confetti.
It's Chaos Confetti.
Yes.
Rip it up and throw it in the air.
Yeah.
The pieces land on it, destroy
Yeah.
it. So Chaos Orb is just flip. The Chaos Orb is a real card.
Right.
A real playable card. 2 colorless. You tap 1. You flip Chaos Orb from the playing area from at least the height of 1 foot. Whatever. And it has to turn over at least once completely. Or it is discarded with no effect. When Chaos Orb lands, any cards in play that it touches are destroyed, as is Chaos Orb. So you don't have to rip up the original Chaos Orb. But the Chaos Confetti, you'd have to rip up and throw it in the air. So now, the tournament we played in when that card first came out, they were allowing you to rip up a different card and throw it in the air.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to actually rip up your Chaos Confetti. But there was some wild cards in that set. It was... I think that one was Unhinged. Unhinged was just...
And the other one is the BFM.
The Big Furry Monster.
Yeah. Well...
One of our buddies still has one of those.
Yeah, that's unhinged or unglued, if I remember correctly.
I believe unglued.
Yeah.
Yes.
See, I always called it the big fucking monster.
That's what a lot of people called it. That.
It's only 2 cards, but when I first heard about it, before I even seen it, I heard it was 4 cards. And you had to have all 4 cards in your hand in order to play it, but it's only 2 cards. And it's like 16 black to play.
So there's a lot of cards. I have some of the unhinged cards up over here. Like there's one called Richard Garfield, where you can play the card. You can play the card for any chipper. So like if you have a card that costs 5 in your hand, you can play as any 5-drop ever in Magic history. You just have to say what 5-drop you're playing it as.
Mental Magic.
Yep, you play Mental Magic. There's one where you have to talk in Piglet.
I think I know that one.
Written completely in Piglet.
I think I know that one.
Yeah, Avatar of Me. He costs 1 less for each 10 years you've been alive, and then his power is equal to your height in feet, and its toughness is equal to your American shoe size rounded to the nearest half. And its color is your eye color.
That's insane.
There's a lot of cool cards from
There's another one, I can't remember what it does, but I know it has to do with Elvis.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one.
My favorite uncard is The Cheese Stands Alone.
I love that one.
If it's the only card on the board, you win the game.
They actually made that into a real card.
So what you would do is like Day of Judgment. Actually, no. Is it Day of Judgment that wipes the board? I know there are cards that wipes the board.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, you have to have that card survive.
Right. So you do Day of Judgment. Yeah, how would you play that?
Creatures. You can't have lands. You can't have anything else. You have to find a way to remove everything. But so what is I have to figure out what the name of the real card is that works that way. But so I built a deck. I built a commander deck called, the commander was Atagatog. So it was, Atagatog is like the king of the Atogs. The Atogs are cards like Psychotog, Chronotog. They all have Atog at the end of their card name, and they all have something to do with either discarding cards or sacrificing creatures or sacrificing certain permanent types. So what I did was, the goal of my deck was to play the real version of Cheese Stands Alone, and then play a card called Enchanted Evening. which turns all your permanents into enchantments. And then I would play the Atog that allows you to sacrifice enchantments. So I would sacrifice everything but the Cheese Stands Alone, and then on my upkeep I'd win the game because I'd have no permanents. But the Cheese Stands Alone. It never won, it was trash, it was awful, but it was fun.
Wait. You can't have any permanents, or the board can't have any permanents?
You can only
okay,
have the Cheese
that makes it a little easier.
Yeah.
I thought it was like there's nothing can be on the board except for a deck.
No. Yeah, no permanents on your side of the board.
Okay, that makes it just a little easier.
Yeah. A little easier, still kind of different. So it was called Barren Glory is the real version of the She Stands Alone. It was a 6-drop enchantment from one of the plane sets. I think Planar Chaos maybe. And it's at the beginning of your upkeep if you have no so this one's even more restricted. If you have no permanents other than Barren Glory and have no cards in your hand. So you had to discard your hand as well too. So I needed that Psychotog out as well. That deck was wild, not that good, but it was super fun to play. When I showed people what the premise of the deck was and what it was about, they thought it was super fun and super cool. And talking about it now actually wants me to make it. Like it makes me want to make it again. It's so much fun.
Have there been any decks that you really wanted to build? Just like this idea came into your head, and you really wanted to build it, but you just had trouble making it and refining it. It just took you forever to get it to where you want it.
Not for me, only because all of my deck building ideas are based on what I have. So if I don't have, I'll never try to build a deck without something I don't have, and that's just because I don't like having to go out and grab things, especially if it's something I know I'm not going to use in the future. So all of the decks that I've been able to build and deck ideas, I've been successful with just because it's been built out of things that I have.
I'm trying to remember the name of the card. I definitely have one. It's a Mardu commander. So black, white, and red.
That it would be a difficult combination.
Alesha, who smiles at death. I had this deck together for 2 or 3 months. The effect on the card is first strike. Whenever Alesha, who smiles at death, attacks, you can pay 2 white or 2 black or a combination of the two. If you do, return target creature card with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. So you take advantage of inexpensive creatures that come into play with cool effects that, exile other creatures or make tokens, like that kind of stuff. And I was so frustrated by that deck, I just couldn't make it work. I couldn't put it together. And it frustrated me beyond all end that I just took it apart.
Did you have other people look at it and help you out?
Yeah.
Huh.
And it was like I had optimal cards. And I wouldn't say like optimal, but I had cards, I had synergy, but every time I played it, I just couldn't get the deck to work. And I just stopped.
Yeah, I mean, and there's definitely been decks that I've put together with the concept of an idea, and the idea, like Mike was saying, the idea in deck building worked, but then once you played it, it was just like, where and why is this not working? Like, what can I do to switch it? And then sometimes you just got to realize that you can build a deck with an idea, but the idea may not be as successful as you think it was, because other people may have things that can combat it, or that sometimes you just don't have. It's not fast enough or optimal enough to do in a setting where you're playing against or with other people.
The one deck I still want to build it. I've been trying for years. I don't know if it's I have lack of cards for it, or I have the lack of experience to build it. A counter burn deck. I always thought that would be a deck that would devastate, because I'm either killing you or I'm counting you or using your own deck against you. And for whatever reason, I have still not been able to construct that.
That is very much a deck that people play all the time.
Yeah, it's so a deck like that, like you're running into a problem where a lot of the most optimal cards for that deck are legacy, and you're gonna need expensive cards like Force of Will, which is 3 colorless, 2 blue, to counter a spell, or you can exile a blue card and pay 1 life and play the card for free, and it just counters a spell. You need Lightning Bolt, you need Lava Pillar. And those decks are good, but in the format that you'd be playing them in, there's just more optimal decks to play. It'd be a really cool, fun deck to play, but the only problem is you're going to find a lot of people that aren't going to want to play against it, because the people that are playing these really fun decks that want to play against other fun decks aren't going to want to play against somebody that's just literally telling them they can't play their deck and they're going to kill them by burning them. And it's definitely doable. Like, there's cards like Counterspell, which is 2 blue, counter a spell. Like Mana Leak, like we touched on earlier, a colorless and a blue counter spell unless they play 3. Cards like Lightning Bolt, Magma Jet, Lava Pillar. So it's definitely doable. The best thing about Magic is there's a website called Gatherer, where you can just go on and search up any Magic card and find it on the website, and it gives you can go search by set, you can search by card color, you can search by abilities, and it gives you all the list of cards. There's websites like Magic MTG Goldfish that you can search up decks that people play, and budget decks, meta decks, all different types of decks. So the state of Magic right now is really, really kind of up in the air with what's going on about not being able to play paper Magic, but there's so many websites where you have resources to tell you which cards do which things, or which decks are good or which decks are bad, or how to build decks, that it's a lot easier to build decks nowadays than it was back when I first started playing.
I can't remember where I heard this, but in just my internet travels, I've heard that there's new rules out there where it's playing older decks, like, I don't know, like it doesn't work or something like that.
Sure.
I only heard snippets of it, so that's why I can't really articulate it, but I heard that there's just like new rules out there where it's not quite the same anymore to play Magic.
I'm not sure.
No? All right. I may have just...
In the past couple of years, there's just been the formats we have: Standard, Modern, Legacy, Pioneer, Commander, Vintage. There's always been those formats, but I'm not sure what they mean by older versions not being able to play. I mean, they might have meant it's harder to break into an older format of Magic because the cards are more expensive, but I'm not sure about play-wise.
They have made changes like switching to the London Mulligan. They did just recently remake some rules changes, but those would be like really, really obscure rules that rarely would occur. And there's a regular sort of bannings that happen. It was like every few months you get a notification if a card is going to be removed from a format, or adjustments need to be made. I'd actually like to bring that up and sort of get Chris's opinion, but when I started playing Magic, there had been, I think, 2 cards banned up until about 2012, and then an additional 2 cards had been banned within like a 6-year period. And over the past 5 years, there have been 23 banned cards.
Now,
that's absurd.
Now, that's only talking about like in competitive, or they just or when you mean banned, they're no longer printed either.
No, they're still printed.
They're still printed.
Okay. Now that I'm thinking through what I heard through the web, I think with some of the newer cards, there's new mechanics behind them, like what's written on the card, how they play. Older decks can't necessarily play against them because of how those new cards work. I think that's what I heard. So if you're playing like casually and you're using like an older deck, because like me, I play older decks. I mean, I think my youngest deck is probably the Vampire one or the Dragon one. but the way these new cards with their own rules and way they play out, an older deck just can't go up against it for some reason.
There's probably the concept of what's called power creep, and that's when cards exist in a vacuum for so long, they need to make something better. So they start adding effects, or they start bumping up its ability. They make it bigger and stronger. There was it Raging Goblin? Was 1 and a red for a 1/1 with haste.
One red.
Oh, it's just one red. Well, one red. 1 red for a 1/1 with haste. And that was pretty good in an aggro deck at the time. And then 5-6 years later, they printed a card called Goblin Guide. And it was 1 red for a 2/2 with haste. And it gave your opponent the ability to look at the top card of their deck when you attacked. And if it was like a land, they got to put it in their hand. But just off of that one creature, you're taking them from a 20-turn clock to a 10-turn clock. So it's this power creep that you see over time. You see card quality goes up, so the older cards can't compete. But then there's some busted old cards. So
all the Moxes and all Black Lotus and things like that.
The Boon Cycle.
Yeah.
One blue, draw 3 cards.
Yeah, cards
one white. One white, gain 3 life.
Time walk. Let's pay 1 color with some blue to take an extra turn.
Is Black Lotus super rare?
Yes. It's the most expensive card in Magic.
I was gonna say that, but I was gonna go with just like super rare. I wasn't most expensive card. What does it do?
It's only legal in the vintage format.
What does it do?
So it's a 0-cost artifact that you can sacrifice it to add 3 mana of any color to your mana pool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Very, very strong.
Turns out like 4 mana on turn 1 is insane.
Yeah.
Do either of you have one?
No.
How many exist?
I know people that do have them, but I do not have one.
How many do you think exist that make it so rare?
There's actually a number. I think there's 3 versions of it. I'm not sure how many are actually in existence. I'm going to look it up.
And that one's no longer printed, right? That's what's keeping it so rare? Have you seen it proxied before?
Yeah. In vintage tournaments, most people proxy their Black Lotuses so they don't damage them because they're worth so much money. They're allowed to proxy their cards if they own them sometimes, so they'll bring in their real copy, but they just don't play with it.
How much is it worth?
Depending on the condition and the set that it's from. So right now there's about 22,800 Black Lotuses.
Are you on comic book resources?
Yes.
So am I.
There's about 22,800 Black Lotuses. We can go. So now, if you want to see what they're.
And is there a foil, non-foil, and the foil would obviously be.
No. It was only printed in. I think the most recent one that was like a was a BCR. I forget the grading. Like Beckett, it was like a 9 or a 9.5 on a scale of 10, on a scale of 1 through 10, and it's over like 500,000.
So right now there's an unlimited one, which is a white bordered, so it's a cheaper one. That's 8.5 going on eBay for $22,400.
Oh my god.
Yes. It's wild. I mean, the black bordered ones are worth even more. This one is a black bordered one that is a 6.5 going for double what that white bordered one at a better graded condition was going for.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
it's like, in my opinion, the Black Lotus is like the ultimate piece of nerd culture. Like there's a picture floating around of somebody that has the car, a Lotus, and it's black, and the license plate says 3 mana.
Nice.
It's wild the amount of money people will pay for this card, and it's an investment. It's a card that you have. It gives you sort of a status in the Magic community if you own one, And if you ever needed to have some quick cash, you can always sell it because there's always going to be a market for it.
Now, you said you know someone that has it. Is it did they buy it, or they just so happen to be one of the people that got it when it came out?
So I actually don't know how our friend obtained his. I think he may have won a tournament. Vintage tournaments typically you play for. You can play for like a Black Lotus or any of the boxes. The winner will get that because they don't typically have too many vintage tournaments a year, and they want a big prize pool for their tournaments. So I think he actually owned 2 and sold 1. And I think he actually won. I'm pretty sure he won 1. I'm not sure how he got the other one.
Huh.
But yeah, I mean, I do not know anyone that has. I don't know anyone that has an original one like that they said they opened up and have held. We've heard stories. When you go to a card store, or when you go to a hobby shop and you go to tournaments and you play, there's always that one person there who's like, my brother or my uncle or my dad had a Black Lotus and has a Black Lotus, blah, 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 but he's in a box somewhere and he has no idea. There's always that one person that claims that someone in their family has a Black Lotus, but unless you got a picture for me of you holding it, unless you have it on your person, you don't have one to me. You can tell me up and down that you have one, but if you have no proof, like I can tell you I got 5 first edition Shadowless Charizards. You don't see me with them. There's no proof. So
right.
Black Lotus is one of those cards that people will throw around by saying that they know someone in their family that has one or they have one at home, blah, 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 because it makes saying you have that card is like saying you're the Holy Grail. It's seriously, it's the best Magic card you could possibly have. And a lot of people know that these people that are saying they have it know that the typical person that does have one doesn't carry it around with them, doesn't like have proof on them that they have it. So nobody really questions them when they say it. When someone says to me like, "Oh, that's awesome, man. You got like a picture of it? Can I see it?" And then the conversation's normally over from there. But that card is just, I don't think I'll ever own one. I don't plan on ever buying one. I don't plan on ever owning one. But I can understand why people do want them, do collect them, and do try to obtain them.
If I fell in love with a vintage, maybe consider it. But at this point, you'd have to take out a second mortgage on your home.
Yes.
Just to pay for cardboard.
What would you do if either of you won one?
Sell it.
Yeah,
really?
100%. So that's what most people do when they win those vintage tournaments. A buddy of mine borrowed a vintage deck, won a vintage tournament, then sold the card that he won, and was able to build his own vintage deck from the card that he won.
That's crazy. I wouldn't. Yeah. You guys were so fast to say sell it.
Because the format's being played, the card isn't played, the cards aren't playable, and it would allow us to bolster our collection with cards that are playable in our format that are still expensive, but we wouldn't have to worry about keeping them sealed away in a vault or something, or in a safe or something like that. We could actually play with the cards.
Huh.
That's, yeah.
All right.
I mean, I definitely have like high value cards that I feel uncomfortable taking places.
Yeah.
I was looking on Archidect at my decks that I have put together, and I have a deck that is all foil, with the exception of 3 cards. Chris has got to get me one of them.
Hey, it's right here.
Yeah.
Or upstairs. Either right here or upstairs. It's upstairs.
But at this point, according to so the 2 cards that can't be foil are called Savannah and Earthcraft, and they were never printed foil.
Mm.
And right now, according to the internet, this deck is worth $2,100.
Wow.
So it's highly collectible. I love it. I hardly like it. It's one of my. It's the culmination of what really locked me into Commander. Like I love this deck. It's the same thing for how Chris had talked about his Rafik deck. I'll never take this deck apart. I will only ever improve it, and I will keep it. Like it's my Magic experience.
Yeah, so like in our play group, in our Commander EDH play group, there are certain commanders that each one of us are associated with. Hope is associated with Riss, I'm associated with Rafik. Some of our other friends have different decks that they're associated with, just because they were either our first decks or they're the ones that we love the most and consistently play.
Yeah. And there's sort of an unspoken rule that you won't build each other's decks. I remember when I came back after my break, I built Rafik, and Chris had said, Mike's the only person I would let build this deck. And then after I built it, I still felt bad, even though he was cool with it. So I took it apart.
and that's where like we have that like Mike said, that unspoken rule where like if somebody, and then it's not for every commander, because we have a buddy who had like 45 commander decks. So like where he had a guy that he identified with, but like he even him with the 45 decks never built one that was one of the ones that someone in our group identified with, which I respected him for, because he would build he would use a worse commander for that color combination so that he wouldn't step on anyone else's toes or do anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I have some rare cards that I like Mike said, that I won't take places. Actually, I lied. No, that's a lie. I take my cards everywhere. All of my deck. Yeah, I like to swag out on people. I definitely like to let people know that I have the expensive cards. And I'm going to swag out right now. You can cut this out because it has nothing to do with Magic if you want. But Hope knows what I'm doing. Opened up this shiny VMAX Charizard the other day on my stream, which is currently going for $600. He is the most expensive card in the newest set. And this card will never go anywhere with me. This card will always stay in a binder at home because I collect Charizards. But other than that, when it comes to Magic, I always have all my binders on me, all my decks on me. I never not have them. And my decks are pretty swagged out. I know Pope and some other players in our group will work on swagging out a specific deck. I like to have little pieces swagged out here and there in each deck. So people are like, oh shit, this looks cool, or oh, that looks awesome. And I only think I have one deck where like almost everything that can be swagged out is swagged out, and that might be my Urza deck. But other than that, I think all my other decks just have little bits and pieces of swag in them.
I have a question about commander decks. Is the commander the only legendary allowed in it?
You can have any other legendary.
All right.
You can. There's actually a rule that if you have a legendary creature that has the same colors, so if I play a green-white, if I play my Riss deck and I have a green-white legendary creature in the deck, I can switch them.
Yeah, before the game starts, Pope can swap out Riss, put Riss in the deck, and take the other green-white creature and make it his commander.
Yeah, I ask because that means I've accidentally made commander decks.
No, yeah, hey, I mean, as long as it's 100 cards and all the same colors of what your commander is, it's a commander deck.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot. They're not 100 cards, but the concept is there.
There you go.
I think Commander is sort of the most inclusive format too.
Definitely.
So, like, Steve, if you want to start playing Magic again, once people can hang out and go to card shops again, come hang out. We'll help you build a Commander deck, and you can jump in a pod. It's awesome.
Totally down for it.
And like the good thing about, at least for me and Mike, is we have levels of decks that we can play with any type of player. Like, I have decks that are lower level, the middle, high, and then CDH. So, like, I can play with literally any group of people that comes up to play. I typically like to ask the people that I sit down with, hey, how good do you think your decks are? Some people don't know how to rate the power of their deck and will either go too high or too low. So I'll play a few games with them to kind of gauge what their power level is and then use decks accordingly. But I'm never the one to pull out a super high-powered aggressive deck right away unless the person that comes in there is just talking smack or, like, being like super obnoxious and like a really ignorant player, then I'll pull out a deck that I know is just going to wipe the floor with them and be like, all right, see you later, buddy. Let's take you down a couple pegs. We're not really like that at this store. We like to have fun and we like to express ourselves, play games.
Do you play casually, or is it only Commander? You don't have like a 60 or an 80 card deck that you guys just like, I want to play casually.
I have a modern deck, a competitive modern deck. But outside of Commander, if I'm building anything for Standard, Modern, Vintage, or Legacy, it's going to be competitive. Just because when we play at the card shop, the Friday night tournaments are typically Standard or Modern. So if I'm going to play in them, I'm going to want to try to do my best and win them because you get prizes for winning. So my 60-card decks are always will be competitive decks. They may not be the best competitive decks, but they'll be something that can hold its own against the other people's competitive decks.
If I play an event like that, I almost strictly play budget. I limit myself to about $40 for the whole deck. One of the last Friday Night Magic events that I played in, I actually won against one of like the top tier like $600 decks, and my deck was worth $25. It was awesome.
It's cool because like we always have to remember, especially like with our play group, is that we play Magic more than the average person that comes to our card store. We play about 3 or 4 times a week, and a lot of those players only play on Friday nights. So when they come to play in those Friday Night Magic tournaments, they want to play the best deck they can because that's their only time to play Magic, and it might be their only time to practice with that deck and play with that deck. So you can't knock them for wanting to play with the most optimal deck because that's what they want to play and that's how they play.
Mm. So you only play Commander casually?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
Well, once this COVID nonsense is done and over with, would it be okay? We played, and since I don't right now have a Commander deck, I just play with one of my 60 or so decks.
I mean, that wouldn't necessarily work, but it seems like you have a couple decks, so we could just use your cards. Yeah. You have stuff that's already set up.
Yeah. I mean, that would work too.
Like Mike said too, once we can get back to being in person, you could just bring your cards up to the store when we come up one night, and we could just help you build a Commander deck out of what you have. And the store's really great because they have binders, they have dollar binders, they have quarter binders that have good EDH cards in them that you can just plug into the decks you have to bolster some of the decks you already had. Like we had a buddy who built a Vampire EDH deck. One of the best commanders in 1v1 was a Vampire, and he got banned in 1v1 because he was so good. And your Markov, he was so good.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you guys typically go? Now, this is going to be getting away from the audience a little bit because we're going to be talking local right now. But do you go to alternate or do you go to showcase? I would go to showcase.
We're alternate universes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go to alternate universes.
I've been there a couple of times.
I'm alternate universes, so I'm alternate universes.
I helped put the shelves up at the first alternate universes location.
Oh wow!
So
me and Mike are kind of like unofficial employees there. Like we can go behind the counter, we can help people make sales, we can do certain things like that because we've been going there for so long. I am actually still employed by them. I help out their online store. I sort cards for them. I help them pull orders and stuff when they make online orders. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. It's been a while, but Alternate Universe is probably one of the biggest Yu-Gi-Oh stores in the area, probably within 20 miles. And they host events called YCSs, or Yu-Gi-Oh Championship Series, or they host Yu-Gi-Oh Regionals. And I've gone and worked for Alternate Universe at their regional events. And I sit at the front and check wristbands and make sure people have, you have a wristband attached to your backpack, you have a wristband attached to your wrist, and you make sure that they have the same number, give information, help people out, tell people they can't come back in if they're being a jerk.
So it's possible that before I met you guys, the one or two times I was there and just didn't know it.
Probably.
There's a very good chance.
If it was a month or Tuesday, Friday, or Sunday, there's a great chance that you ran into me one of those 3 days.
Huh. You ever been to a showcase and play there?
I used to play there when it was in the mall. Me and Pope actually, we were frequents there when it was in the mall for a while.
I won my first ever draft there. I got past 5 Vampire Nighthawks.
That's I
love that card.
Yeah, I actually frequented there because my job at the time was making me have to work until 7 o'clock on Friday, and that's when F&M started, was at 7 o'clock, and my job was right next to the mall at the time, so it was easier for me to make it in time to showcase than it was for me to make it in time to Alternate Universes. So I was actually playing there for a little while.
I find that I've participated in F&Ms at both locations, and I find that Showcase is more competitive. You're more likely to have the grinders, the people that are going to Star City events on the weekend, go to Showcase, and you're more likely to have the casual players or the creative deck builders, the rogue deck builders, go to Alternate Universe.
Agreed.
I think we covered quite a bit here tonight. This is a good stopping point. Mike wishes to no longer be found on social media, but he's on previous episodes. So check him out on previous episodes of Jamsin Podcasts. Chris, where can people find you?
So people can find me on Twitter at, let me check real quick. I always forget which one my Twitter is. TTVCM3TV. You can find me on Instagram, CM3TV, and you can also find me on Twitch, CM3TV. I go live Monday through Friday, or at 7 till about midnight, and then on Sundays I'm live from around 5 till about 9 or 10.
All right, cool. Well, you can catch this podcast on all your podcasting platforms. I want to thank you guys for coming on. We got to do this again sometime. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a part of Magic we haven't talked about yet, or we're going to just find another topic to talk about. But I want to thank everyone out there for watching and listening. If you like what you saw, like it. If you think other people like it, share it. If you really liked it, hit the subscribe button. Thank you again, and live your imagination.